All right, everyone, welcome to Grablives. Just to start off with our disclaimer, everything we say and do does not reflect the City of Los Angeles Fire Department. And just to start off also with our partnership with Frontline Behavioral Wellness. Frontline Behavioral Wellness is about finding care for those who are in need, who are first responders, police officers, firefighters, veterans. And, there's hope. That is one of the main components of what Frontline Behavioral Wellness is here to offer you. And in hope, you can find solace and peace, and Frontline's going to offer you that. And through their services, they are going to provide you with much care beyond what you personally can handle through your own medical insurance and so forth, going through your own network. And so one of the things they do is they offer a hotline, and reaching out to them and to see if you meet their criteria. If you just need someone to talk to, they have a peer support group program. Their hotline is open 24/7 and is confidential. So reach out to 661-877-7241. And starting off also with Grablives today, meeting with Dr. Heather Williams, who's been on the podcast before. She is a wonderful asset to finding what's going on with this crisis we're dealing with mental health and behavioral issues within this line of work, firefighters and first responders dealing with these issues that are on the horizon. And this episode is really special because we're going into the topic of resilience, finding out what that word means, and further investigating the qualities of going into balance, disassociativeness. And this is what we want to do, is talk about these certain things that no one's talking about and putting out the message that we're here, we're in it with you. So listen in on this wonderful episode with Dr. Heather Williams. Stay tuned. All right, everybody. Welcome to Grablives, and thank you for showing up and listening. Today we have Dr. Heather Williams. I know she doesn't like being called a doctor, but we still want to honor, that certificate that puts a name behind her name, Heather. So thank you so much, Heather, for coming today and talking about some important topics. And one of them is going to be resilience and that word, what it means, and kind of with that word, it comes up pretty often within our department, and specifically our department, and also going into all departments, all fields of work, because it's a marker to help push past the limits of the self. But there's a place that you have to find balance with yourself and not be so lopsided. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm sure it's going to go into other things and different aspects of what this is, and finding solutions with mental health and behavioral health, because, we're building up this village that we talked about prior, and that's what we're doing. And we're marking this place with figuring it out, and we're revolutionizing what this mental health crisis is showing us, as we're working through it. So it's a self-discovery. It's a massive discovery with the masses, and that's where we're at. So thanks for showing up.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Of course. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to start talking about with resilience and what that means to kind of the fire service and police officers, first responders and so forth.
Well, I'm curious, how in the fire service, how do you guys define resilience? Like, that word does get thrown out. Now it's like wellness and resiliency. Those are the two words that we use everywhere. So I'm wondering, from what you guys are learning, what does resilience mean to you? And then I can share more about what I think it is, what it's not.
No, I get where you're coming from, and it's super good to have this idea, right? Of, well, first of all, there's this fire department idea of what resilience is, and then my own personal values on what I think resilience is. So resilience, is usually taken on a physical form. starting when you first get hired, going to the drill tower, and you're pushed to this limit physically, and not letting your mental part, your emotional part come into this part with yourself to push yourself to that limit. And so I think a lot of it is we think it's physical, to get to that point where you're pushing so much, and that's the purpose of it, is to have everyone push you to your limits, to push you to your last part of, okay, I'm going to give up, but you push past that, and you just allow yourself to find this power within to move forward. And that kind of weeds out the weak per se,
Right.
because it's designed that way, and it's a rapid up climbing hill to do that process for the people that are in this drill tower, this academy, and you're going on through probation and so forth. It's the same thing. And we train and we train and we train to make sure everything's robotic and everything's in this synchronistic system, to when your heart rate's jacking up, you're nervous, especially when you have your first 5 years in the job and you have this massive behemoth of a fire, or you have a bunch, like 3 children laying on the freeway, and you got to save them. Okay, so that's when you go into action, and this robotic training comes through, and that's
Training
the
and
resilience.
experience kick in.
So that's cool and all, and I get that. That's part of what we do. The one thing that resilience is leading to is this idea that you can do more and more and more until you subconsciously can't do it anymore, and you've lost foot within yourself being grounded and the foundational network with yourself in your personal life. That's the kind of thing where I'm personally, this whole lopsided part where you're so much resilient that that becomes almost a disassociation with yourself. And that's one of the things that firefighters have in common, is that we are disassociating at a certain extent, to where our feelings, our emotions are not ever used anymore. That's why we have this high rate of divorce, and you're unable to connect with your children. So that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm feeling, with kind of this whole spectrum of finding a middle ground with this word, with this aspect of the self, which is important and valuable, but to find balance with it.
Yes. Thank you for that. When you think about resilience coming from a physical perspective, like one of the ways to push your resiliency, which is really your ability to adapt and overcome, like by definition, that's what resiliency is. And physically, people will say, do a cold plunge, right? Go do something to push beyond what you're comfortable with. And last weekend, actually, my husband was like, get in the pool. It was freezing. Get in the pool. We're going to do this together. And I did. I pushed through the cold, and I pushed through the chattering, and it felt good, right? Physiologically and mentally, to be strong. But resilience is also so many other things. It's having grit. It's having determination. It is also having a mindset, and this can be really hard for first responders, is to have a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. So let me explain. Fixed. It's either A or B. I'm either good at this or I'm not. I'm either going to eat only these foods or I'm not. It's very black and white. It's very all or nothing thinking. And so where does that leave the human brain for failure? Where does that leave the human brain for challenges that maybe you didn't completely succeed at? And so resilience to me is so much more. It's having a growth mindset. It's being able to say, I can get through a challenge, and if I don't make it 100%, or if I fail, I'm going to fail forward. I'm going to work on not beating myself up too long. I'm going to learn from this experience and grow from this experience. And that's also a term called self-efficacy, where you can look back in your life and think of the challenges that you've been through, and you're like, God, that sucked. But I got through it, right? I'm on the other side of it, and I learned how to cope with it differently. I learned what not to do, and I've grown as a human being because of those experiences. And so that's very similar to resiliency as a growth mindset, is what can I learn from this? How can I grow from it? But when you throw in public safety, type A personalities, alphas, both male and female alphas, you throw a lot of perfection into the world. Like, things have to be perfect. I have to be perfect. And the reality of life is that there is nothing perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. And once we come to accept that as human beings, we're not perfect, we're going to make mistakes, and we can grow from those mistakes, there's more grace given to us as individuals from ourselves. Like, there's a nurturing that can happen from giving ourselves grace when we're not perfect or we make a mistake or whatever it is. And something that I actually learned from my mom growing up, I was always a type A, very hard on myself, overachiever, your classic type A. And I remember I had failed at something or didn't get something, and I was pissed. And she said, you know what? You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be hurt, disappointed. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. In fact, you can go ahead and have your pity party. And I know everybody listening knows what a pity party is. She said, but we're going to set a limit, a time limit. And so whether it's a week or 2 weeks or a few days or whatever that appropriate limit is, you have your pity party, you set your limit, and then you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you keep on going. And you keep on going through the unknown, and you keep on going through the fear, and just trust the journey. And I would push back against that. And I almost feel like I just always had to learn the hard way, and I was scratching and clawing my way to wherever I was. But as I've gotten older, that lesson that she taught me in high school has helped me teach first responders how to give themselves permission to feel, one, permission to be human and vulnerable and honest, and heal. Because we aren't perfect human beings. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fail. But it's what we choose to do with it. So I guess you could call that the mental side of the resiliency factor.
Yeah, for sure. That's so beautifully put. And the way the end of that is honoring the journey. And that's the biggest lesson here is to do that. And that's what's going to help you get past the struggle. And when you're in this struggle, you have to honor being in it and respecting that that's the process sometimes. And it's difficult, but
It is.
that's the part of life, being human and our humanness. And from a psychological standpoint, going into these thoughts, these emotions, part of your healing is going into them and feeling them and going into the thoughts and marking this part of yourself with what's your truth, what's an illusion, because
what are you making up and creating?
Exactly. And, one of the parts too is, for me, I always looked up words and what their meanings were. And I did look up what resilience meant. And it's pretty interesting, the stuff that it says. And it says it's capable of withstanding shock without permanent deformation or rupture, and tending to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change, and a capability of a strained body to recover its size and shape after deformation caused especially by compressive stress. And it's like these antonyms to them, which would be the opposite of word of resilience, would be rigid and stiff. So about it is like this flexibility part, to
Yes.
adaptation, to change. And that's one of the things is that firefighters are stubborn. So we resist.
No.
There's this famous quote, I've said it before. It's like two things firefighters don't like. It's changing the way things are.
Yep.
So it's like this part of us, we don't want to adapt to change, especially with this rapid evolution of society that's happening right now with beliefs, polar opposites between the left and the right political sides.
Yep.
And then we're run by these, either it's one conservative or one that's non-conservative place of what politics is running the department you're working for. I know for the city of Los Angeles, we know it's non-conservative, and it changes the way we do things. And that's why we have this whole, vaccination thing that went happen, and then it really severed our department from, connecting with each other. And there was just this polarizedness that disunited our department, which caused even more mental stress because there was no capability for everyone to unite with each other. And that's what we do inside the firehouse. And that's what's caused even more mental struggle, mental hurt, because belief systems started coming into play and really seeded this virus into like our family, our work family,
Yep.
which really caused a main precursor to what's happening now. Because I did some research on some statistics on the upscale on suicides have increased dramatically since 2020, since the lockdown. And I really truly believe that's one of the main issues here. So there's so much in play here that's going on. And for me, I had to learn how to rest. I didn't do that for a long time. I mean, I barely started understanding that. And that was the balancing act with resilience to, my girlfriend, I always want her to do a cold plunge with me too. I have one in my backyard. I do it all the time. And she hates doing it. She says it doesn't make her rest or feel.
It's not comfortable.
Yeah. So one of the things is I learned to do certain things like sitting in stillness to balance out, my alpha mentality to always push myself to the limit physically. But what happens when you can't do that, and find that those different practices that are subtle and using the parasympathetic nervous system to find its balance with all this stuff as well. So
Absolutely. When you talk about being rigid, right, the opposite of resiliency, I think of a picture that I've seen over and over again where there's a tree that's blowing and it's bending, not breaking. And so that is the flexibility of what we can choose to do when there's adversity and challenges and polarization and all the things that we're living through is how do we choose to take control back? In fact, that's a factor in resilience is noticing and noting what am I in control of, because I can't control what's going on politically. I can't control how people think or how people feel or behave, but I get to decide if what I'm doing is helping me or hurting me. And what's good for me in the process of having some control. And resiliency is a perishable skill. What does that mean? That means that our brains are conditioned to think a certain way, especially in public safety. And some of that is pretty rigid. Sometimes it's as rigid as people are either good or bad, evil or not evil. So how we choose to think about our world, how we choose to decide what we can control, how we behave and don't behave, think and don't think, that's where we have control. But I know that when people are experiencing change, that there's resistance because change is scary, change is stressful. Even when change is good, people still push against it because it still creates that stress, is good or bad, still creating the same response inside the body. So it could be difficult for people to feel resilient if they're not practicing the mindset shift and the change in coping.
yeah, I mean the coping part is part of where we're at because some people work in super busy districts to where it's an attempt mentally to prepare yourself before every single shift because you know what you're getting yourself into.
Yep.
I work in a pretty balanced, busy area. It's not like extremely busy, but it's pretty busy. The engine averages at least 10 to 12 calls a shift, and the rescue averages at least 8 to 10 calls. That's a pretty stacked up day.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as for paramedics in the city of Los Angeles, it's probably one of the busiest departments in the United States. So every single
Absolutely.
rescue is going to be extremely busy. And for me, like over the course of my years of work, it got to my point where like I would reach burnout here and there. I probably reached burnout 2 or 3 times in my career. And I knew when I was burnt out, and I knew every single time I went into work, I was just hating going into work.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point I gave myself my practices. And that's what really started to shift things for me. mentally, physically, emotionally when I go into my work and, I stretch my body before I start a long shift, before I even work out. And those things would really, help me throughout my entirety of that one shift, well, 124 hours. But if it was 72 hours, that's just, you're on autopilot after maybe 48 hours for sure. Because there's like no end in sight. You're just getting up and doing it, in this just robotic robotic movements of what you're doing. And that battered and bruised, feeling, it doesn't feel very good. And when you feel it, you're like, wow, this is, I'm reaching a state of burnout. And then you got these mandatory shifts you got to work, and then you get pushed to the limit, and then you go home and then you start drinking again. If you have a really bad drinking habit, that's one hole I found myself in, to where that I was, tending to that battered and bruised mentality with alcohol. And that's when things got really bad for me and my own mental health. And, I now make conscious decisions with everything I do, with the food I eat, and, the way I do things at home that's going to prepare me for that shift. And so I think the biggest thing is to make conscious decisions on, what works for you. And I would say, take note and watch yourself, watch your thoughts every day. Watch what you eat every day. Watch how much water you're drinking every day. All this stuff plays a super capable role of changing from one extreme to another, to where you can find this, balance with this perseverance of pushing yourself to the limits and standing firm with your boundaries you're setting with yourself, and make a fierce boundary with those lines, with the people you interact with, and so forth.
I think that I'm kind of laughing about boundaries because I'm not great at it either, being a servant myself and helping people. But I think it comes down to what's your threshold, like your mental threshold, not even your physical threshold. Where am I at in my head when do I know when I'm done? And at what time of night is that when I just have to say enough is enough? Am I reading things that don't make sense? Am I finding myself completely like mentally fatigued and I can't even understand what I'm reading or doing? And I'm getting angry and irritable. Like, we need to know, and that's where emotional intelligence kicks in, is knowing what we're experiencing, knowing how to call it what it is, being able to notice it in other people, and also learning how to regulate it. And so a lot of people in public safety may have the knowledge that something doesn't feel right. I feel uncomfortable, but they don't know what to do with that discomfort. And that's what oftentimes leads to the drinking or other types of behaviors that become habitual or even addictive, because any behavior can become addictive. And now, like, oh, I'm not, people are not going to drink, but they're on their phones 24/7. They're scrolling, into the abyss, and their families are like, hey, could you put your phone down and pay attention? Hang out with me, be present, play a game, go for a walk. So much has to do with our emotional intelligence to be able to understand, okay, I'm strong and I can get through and I can keep pushing through. But what percentage of me is even here right now that's able to do that? And it's taken me until I was in my 40s to figure out what that looked like for me. And so again, using those tools and using those lessons learned through my experiences with critical incidents and trauma and energy and stress and burnout and all the things I've experienced, getting to know yourself better helps you communicate it better to the people around you. So even when you're on duty and you have to go, it's taking a moment to say, do I even have my basic needs met? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I hangry? Right? Do I have to pee? I mean, it could be the simplest things, but it's checking in on your body and checking in on your brain. Where am I at? What do I need to sort of reboot? And if you guys have a chance to say, okay, I am mentally fatigued because I've been on for 48 hours and I'm just go, I'm like a robot right now. Can you spend 3 minutes laying down on the floor on your bunk and sort of grounding yourself or breathing to sort of try to get yourself a little bit centered? It's kind of like stealing time. I am working with a firefighter who is really struggling with not getting his hour workout in. He's pissed. I can't get my hour work in. We're too busy. We keep getting called. We're holding the wall at the hospital and on and on and on. And the idea was, well, it's either I have to do an hour workout at one time or I don't work out at all. And I'm like, okay, so you don't have control over how people's emergencies show up or their stupid incidents or whatever's going on in the field. So what if instead you took 15 minutes and you broke up your workout into 4 different places? 15 minutes in between calls, in between runs, and be creative. Same with eating. If lunchtime is at noon or whatever time you guys eat, and you're on a run at 11 o'clock and you're like, oh, we'll go back and eat, but you're not sure how long this is going to take. Do you have protein bars and protein drinks and things that you can have on the rig so that you have food in the event that you're not nourished and your blood sugar's dropping? So it's like really thinking from a creative place of wellness and resiliency. Like, how are you going to adapt on a high stress situation when adrenaline's flooding your system and maybe making you sick? Now you have all this acid brewing in your gut because you haven't eaten. So it's like being proactive in a way too, is I think being resilient.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was going to say the same thing, because that's what I've done is I can't get an hour workout. I know I'm not going to get an hour workout. Pretty much there's like 90% chance I'm not
right
going to get that hour workout, but I'll break it up, and it's in between calls. I'll be doing, that 15 minutes, and that's worth it to me, whether I'm doing push-ups or pull-ups or whatever it is, lifting weights in between. And that helps me so much. And especially helps it being into the body again, bringing yourself back into that somatic visceral action really helps in between the runs that you're going on. So one of the things I've worked with is, going through critical calls back to back to back. I've had like a series, like 8 calls back to back to back, where it's so busy. And once I get to that 5th call, that's critical, to where I really have to do my job. I'm taking out drugs, doing multiple IVs, and I have to be on the phone talking to the hospital, all these things at once. And then I have, let's say, I even throw in, a rookie, or you even throw in, like a paramedic intern as well. Like, it's a lot. So one of the things I would have to do is in between runs, I would do different breathwork exercises, or I would get out of the rig and I would do this thing where you call shake the tree, where you just get up and you jump for like 3 minutes and you just shake your body. And that's shaking out this stagnant energy from that call. You're shedding that a little bit. And it really helps. I highly recommend, if you're in a busy area, do these small practices. And sometimes my paramedic partners, I was fucking crazy. Like, dude, what are you doing? I was like, dude, I'm just, regulating myself. And these are small things that seem strange to, someone, but what you're doing. If you have an intention behind it, you're really creating this regulation of the nervous system, and coming back into the body is one of the best things you can do if you are in those busy areas. So these are things that you're activating this intelligence to the nervous system, which is really important, because if you're always on this fight or flight, which we are, you have to learn these different ways to stimulate that vagus nerve to regulate your nervous system in such a way that's going to bring everything into harmony and balance, and giving yourself this moment to, because I've had moments where I couldn't think anymore. And I was like, whoa, like I'm having so much going on. I'm rattled all at once. How can I bring this into balance, or how can I do this? And before, I didn't know or understand how to do it. And after just studying, my body, and studying how to listen to my body, and study myself more and more and more, I began to, attune to this body mind mastery, which I'm always trying to attain. And it's always you have to keep practicing it, because it's not going to come at you. It's just like every day is different, and you have to approach it like that. So that's part of resilience, is knowing that every day is different, and your adaptability to what's going to happen, especially on your shift, when you're showing up at work. When you could show up to work and get a fire right then and there, and that happens. And so that's part of it, is knowing how to recover, and knowing when to rest. And I think for me, a long time I was disassociative. to where I didn't know how to connect to my body any longer. And that brought up a lot of really bad patterns of behavior for me and destructive behaviors with me. And I've lost certain friends and family members because of that reason, because of the way I treated myself and treated others, because I was disconnected. And that's kind of the whole point here, is to reconnect with yourself and redetermine your own, like, I guess, perception, right? And that's the thing you're talking about, is you're perceiving a different side of the reality here. You know, this guy's coming into work and he's busy and he can't get his hour workout, but you're changing a perspective. And that's what it is maneuvering your way around their thoughts of things. And that's part of what we're dealing with here.
And that takes us back to the fixed mindset versus a resilient growth mindset. If A isn't working for me, but all you're willing to look at your workout routine is an hour, and not look at how can I have an hour but break it up? And do I actually need an hour? There is a lot of research that shows too that too much cardio actually enhances our fight, flight, freeze response. And so do you know what your body needs when it needs it? We can sweat by doing a high intensity workout for 15 minutes, and that for a lot of people is much better than trying to run for 45. Depends on where you're at, you know, age-wise and everything else. But living in a stressful world that you guys do, try shorter stints of getting your heart rate up and then slowing it down, and see if that also helps. So I think, you know, we just get in this fixed mindset that if I'm going to work out, I'm going to do it this way. If I'm going to eat, I'm going to do it this way. And you got to try and see what works for you. That's part of that, the ability to not break in the wind, so to speak. I also want to talk about support as a form of resilience. I wrote my dissertation on critical incident debriefing and building resilience in public safety. And the number one factor in my research as it related to law enforcement, same thing in the fire service, is the perception of support. So it's the perception of support from the top down within the organization. It's the perception of support from peer support groups, and it's the perception of support at home. So when people go through tough times, organizationally, out in the field, whatever it is, their perception of support also helps them be flexible, adapt, and overcome whatever that thing was. So if you think about someone goes through a difficult time and they feel organizational betrayal, administrative betrayal. They're being asked to do more than they're capable of doing. There's no thank yous. There's no, hey, I appreciate you staying the extra day or doing the mandatory or whatever. You're not robots. You are still human beings. And human beings thrive on feeling appreciated and connection, right? You talk about the fire family, the police family. Well, when they get betrayed by those people they are considering family, that can be a very deep wound. And now that support's gone and they're not feeling so resilient. And so I really want to encourage everyone who's listening that regardless of your position, what departments you work for, you get a choice on how you show up every single day. And I teach this in my peer support classes because burnout, in my opinion, is contagious. Like,
for sure,
our attitudes are contagious, our energy is contagious. And if you show up, you choose, right? You, again, how do I get to have some control in the world? I get to choose how I show up. And if you show up and you're grumpy and you're picking on everybody and cussing under your breath, then that's the energy that you're putting into your station and the energy you're probably going to get back. And so in a world where maybe there is some organizational betrayal and polarized political views and all the stuff that goes on, you're like, well, I can't control any of that, but I can control how I show up and say good morning to everybody. Or how I choose to, to banter and joke around at the kitchen table. So part of being resilient is your perception of support, and you get to be the kind of support you want others to be for you.
Thank you for that. No, that's there's so many good points. And when you say certain things sometimes, names and faces come up to mind
I bet.
because I know who these people are, in my own world. And I think one of the things that's really important that you're bringing up is that feeling of you're just a pawn on a chessboard.
I'm just a number. I'll hear a lot.
That shit gets to you,
Yep.
and you start to lose a bit of purpose with yourself, and that's a driving force with your perseverance to get through that shift or multiple shifts or that month. And I think I speak to the masses of everyone in this line of work that sometimes you're just waiting for that vacation because you feel like that. You feel like you're being used and abused, and it doesn't feel good. To get that appreciation from your superiors, that goes into what we're talking about here and that's leadership. And leadership is so valuable to understand that emotional intelligence of what you're talking about earlier as well too, is that these are important things, but you don't have to have, those badges on your collar in a position to be in a point of leadership with yourself and leading your crew to have
agree.
these ways of pushing the paradigm of your attitude, the way you perceive the world today, the way you see the now, and what the outcomes are going to be. You don't know them sometimes,
Right.
and accepting the things that that you cannot change, and that's an acceptance part where it brings in this place of just really finding within yourself, like, okay, why am I going to stress on something I cannot change?
Right.
I'm creating more resistance within myself, and it's going to create more stress internally. And your internal world is a reflection of your outside world. And you have to take these things into perspective, and these thoughts that you have to learn to control them and being able to also allow them to come through too, and find some balance between them. And you can change them immediately and have this perspective change, which makes your insight of your day way better. And over a period of time, you're gonna see a difference in yourself after you start changing that inner world. But that support is huge. And if I know guys who've come to me and they don't have support at home, that's a huge thing, to where they have to come home and they don't have that. That really puts a main, a wrench in their system of, how do I find balance if I can't even find it at home? And I know people who just have newborn babies as well. That's one of the biggest things is, how do I come home and I can't even sleep when I'm at home? Guys feel like they're going to get more sleep when they're at work because they're not getting sleep when they're at home, which is a whole factor. So just being transparent with your home life and making sure, what you need is really put out there. I think we just did this peer support group training, and one of the homework, lessons was like, you need to go home and do something for yourself, And the next day, this captain was like, I couldn't do anything for myself because I have 5 kids, And then like the instructors are like, but you had to do something for yourself. That was the homework. That was the whole purpose.
What, he's going to get an F?
And so it has to be this perspective change. Okay, you can do something within 3 to 5 minutes. You can do something for yourself. I journaled today for 5 minutes, and I gave myself half a page, and that was enough for me. And so you have to give yourself the 5 minutes. Okay, even though if you have 5 kids at home, that's fine, but start managing your time wisely to honor yourself.
Well, and the other part of that is you have to learn to communicate with your loved ones at home so they know where you're at and what you need, while also respecting and recognizing what they need. Because if wife is home or parents home with 5 kids for the last 2-3 days or whatever it's been, I'm sure that parent's pretty burned out on the kids. Like, okay, my partner's back. Now here you go, right? Hand you the baby kind of thing. And so what I'm trying to train both police and firefighters to do is to recognize, well, what percentage of you is even left to be present with your kids, your family right now? And they'll say some days it's 10%, some 20, and some minus 10. It's like, then recognize that. And then the next step is to communicate. Hey, I am not in a good place. I am mentally and physically exhausted. I have about 5% left of what's, of my 100%. I need to eat and shower before I can engage in the family life. I need 30 minutes. Maybe they do need to work out before they leave, or I need to, shower the shift off, or whatever's going on. It's what do you need in order to be present? And if we can talk to our loved ones like that and they're respectful of that, like if I give my spouse 10 to 15, 20 minutes when he gets home, I know he's going to be a better father, husband, partner than if I just throw a kid at him or a dog or anything else and say, hey, okay, here, you're home. Because they will have had what they needed to reboot. And that's the whole idea is if you two can communicate with each other about what you need in order to feel rebooted, then you're going to get a much better version of that person once they've rebooted. But people struggle with communication. And it's hard because they're first not recognizing in themselves what they need and how they're feeling about it. And this has taken a lot of practice in my life too. I am married to, I mentioned this last time, to a captain at the sheriff's department. He's in charge of their special enforcement bureau, so SWAT, bombs, canine, and crisis negotiators. And it's nonstop. And we've really, between both of our jobs, have had to learn, like, I am not in a place to talk, right? I don't even have the mental capacity to have a conversation with you right now. Let me eat some dinner, let me exercise, work out, let me get this last email sent, whatever it is. And then I'll say, okay, now I have the mental capacity to be here for you. How was your day? Tell me about whatever. But that's taken a lot of practice, and that's taken divorce. And we're committed to not ever getting divorced again. So I really want to encourage people out there to find the language that works for them, to find the communication strategies that work. And I find that I do a lot of communication coaching in my office. I call it coaching and not therapy, just because it's like, all right, get your phone out. We're going to actually come up with the words for you to say to your loved one to start a healthy conversation. And trust me, that's a perishable skill too, because I get it wrong sometimes also.
I love that. That's so valuable with communication, right?
Yeah.
And I would shut down often after shifts, and that was part of like my state in disassociating. And so I experienced that, and I know my girlfriend knows when I shut down, and she'll call it out, and that's why I love her so much, is because she calls out my bullshit.
Yep.
And she tells me when I'm shutting down, and I know it. I'm very aware.
You can feel it.
I feel when it's coming on, and that's the thing is I'm conscious of it, and I decide to do it anyways. So that makes it worse, But prior to that, it would be unconscious shutting down, and that was just stress, straight up.
Yep.
And I just wanted to just bury myself in basically my own little world and just shut everyone out. And that felt good for me.
But what's wrong with doing that if you're aware of it and you can communicate it?
Right. And that's the change that happened, is I became more conscious of it,
right,
and aware of it. And that's the part of this emotional intelligence and awareness of your actions. Because I know when I'm hiding and avoiding from something, if I don't want to go into a conflict with my mom, my dad, my girlfriend, her daughter, I know when I'm just holding back a little bit to just process for a second, instead of going straight into it and just exploding. Personally for me, I don't deal with more anger issues or things like that, but I can explode. And I know when I have that self-discipline to take a step back and just evaluate the situation for a second, evaluate both sides and see my perspective. And is my perspective valid, or is that perspective valid from the other side of the story?
right.
And that's just part of being human and being in relationship with others. One of the things is conflict at work. And that's one of the things that that really takes a point to set your own boundaries and set your own transparency, because you want to make sure everyone's safe. That's the biggest thing in our line of work. And we're working in a balanced, harmonious state, especially when you're a paramedic and you're working with another partner who's not activating his or herself up to your standards. That's a common theme because there's no right or wrong answer here to the call or whatever. And everyone goes back to policy and procedures. That's what it always goes back to.
Yep.
And so everyone's got this different perspective on what's right or wrong. But it's important. I've grown through conflict inside, the firehouse where I've had to approach someone and say, hey, man, I didn't like the way you handled that call. I don't like the way you spoke to that person, X, Y, and Z. And it's been done to me too. And I've appreciated when someone has been transparent with me about what's come up. And I know I've grown through it with certain people, and I'm stronger in a relationship with them because of it.
Yep.
And I know people who just completely, we just went separate paths, and that's just how it works. Because
when you say I'm not comfortable with what happened, I don't like how this went down, you're taking responsibility for how you feel.
Yeah.
You're taking responsibility for your perception and for your communication, and you're allowed to have that opinion. You're allowed to have that thought. And the tone and delivery is the biggest part.
For sure.
Along with those I statements that make a difference. Like, I respect you. I appreciate you. You're my brother. You're my partner. You're my whatever. But I'm really struggling with how you handle that call.
It's hard to do.
It is. It's so hard to be assertive. And yet, if it's a life and death situation, you guys are assertive as can be. But then you turn the struggle inside this police station, or the fire station, or whatever it is. And it's like the conflict avoidance comes out. But that's also part of being resilient, is learning to have a voice, being assertive, working through the discomfort of all of that. Because most people aren't going to be like, yeah, sign me up for a fight. Like, that's not what we want. But we can learn to communicate in a way that feels good and reduces stress. Because when I see people like shoving down their annoyance or their feelings, or they feel like they don't have a voice at work, then that bubbles to the surface and it becomes an implosion or an explosion too. So I'll actually give directives like, hey, your homework is to go talk to your partner about your concerns, and then come back to me and tell me how you're experiencing work now. And it's like, oh my God, like the weight's been lifted, right? The elephant's out of the room, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And maintaining your position with humility and self-respect, but also compassion is a valid place, but not really taking. So compassion is a pretty interesting perspective, because we lose this compassionate state with ourselves because of the calls we go on and just through the job, and I know through my own understandings through different teachings and practices that I've understood in Buddhism, they call something called idiot compassion, is when you've lost touch with compassion and self-respect for yourself, that you are unable to give it to someone else. And that's an important factor that I looked into that. And it's kind of funny the way they express it, right? Idiot compassion. And it's so true. And that's part of using this intelligence of yourself and recognizing, the entirety of the whole here, and the pecking order. There's so many things at place here. Right. Because I've gone through conflicts where they've used the pecking order in the firehouse, because sometimes you'll go to the drivers, which usually are the locker room leaders in our department. And they're the ones who kind of handle conflict if there's something going on. So sometimes people will cut straight instead of going to me about something they felt wrongly about, and go straight to the other person. And I'm like, hey, how come you didn't come to me straight forth? And now you have to add someone else to the equation.
Right.
But there's ways around the whole situation, and you have to use your discernment rather than judgment on what's the best route here. If you've gone to that person 3 or 4 times, they're still not listening, then you can go use the locker room leader, whoever's kind of in charge of the hen house per se.
No, I agree. I'm just growing up. I just don't like drama. So if there's a problem, just come talk to me about it directly.
Yeah.
There doesn't have to be a fight. There doesn't have to be name calling or anything negative. It's like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Or, hey, you seemed off today. Did I do something to create that? Or standoffish or whatever. Like, I would, even confront people that were acting different with me. And I'm sure where that came from is I was raised by a very straightforward, direct mom. And just there's not a lot of energy in life, like energy in the world to have a life full of conflict. So you get to choose, again, going back to control, you get to choose how you address concerns or frustrations with the people that you work with and the people at home. And it doesn't have to be done in a negative way. But a lot of people learn that talking about their feelings or confronting conflict is being confrontational. That being assertive is being a bully or bitchy or aggressive. So yeah, communication's huge. I wanted to say something about something I read in regards to forgiveness, because I know that people really struggle with forgiving and they'll hold grudges. They'll say, I don't think I could ever forgive them. You know, there's just, again, kind of this all or nothing way of looking at it. And I just really want to challenge everyone listening that when you choose forgiveness, that's another form of resiliency. You get to choose, again, this goes back to your choice, your control, to forgive somebody for wrongdoing for you. It's not for the other person who hurt you or upset you. It's for your healing. It's for your well-being. It's for your peace. And sometimes that takes some work, right? It's going to take some therapeutic work. It's going to take some creative work, whatever that looks like for individuals. But forgiveness is a choice, and it's another form of resilience. And how long do you want to carry around that weight of hurt on you? Because it's weighing you down mentally and physically, spiritually even.
So well put. And I'm glad you brought that up. That's beautiful. And, forgiveness is just as hard as asking for forgiveness sometimes, and just biting down your ego and just saying you're sorry to someone for how you acted, how you reacted. I've been there on both sides, and, it takes a bigger person to say, hey, you know what? I don't like the way I responded, how I reacted. I just want to let you know I'm sorry. And I take ownership of everything that I do. Mm-hmm. And I'm just asking you to forgive me. That's not an easy thing to do. And I've had to, process something myself before, and inside the workplace and respecting the people I work with is important to me. And knowing that if I make a mistake, that's okay. But making sure that transparency is there where someone recognizes where you're standing from a heart space, and how you express yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's a form of leadership in itself as well.
I agree that asking for forgiveness, admitting when you make a mistake is admitting you're not perfect. And for people who struggle with, well, if I'm not perfect, I'm not good enough. This is like a very subconscious foundation that was set years ago. Then asking for forgiveness, admitting mistakes can feel very painful. So it's learning to work through those moments. But most people are, at least when I say most people that I talk to are reasonable and don't want to harbor anger and sadness and loss and all the things that they're holding on to because of whatever. And so I really want to challenge you to think about, the pain that you carry with you, and is there someone you need to forgive? And maybe you're looking in the mirror saying, I need to forgive myself.
That is one of the hardest things is, I was in a room with people, with other practitioners and stuff. And, one person asked, like, what do you think is one of the most, everyone has in common that, they can't let go of? And it's, self-love was the answer in the room. Because a lot of people don't like themselves, and a lot of times you have to forgive yourself in order to forgive others. And, that's going to take a lot more work to find out what you don't forgive about yourself. And having that regret, guilt, and shame, those things are not easy to go into, but it's like you're uncovering, what's under that. And you still have to go through this excavation and what you truly felt to go into the forgiveness first. Because if you don't know what to forgive, then how can you forgive?
Right.
And so that's why you got to really, really stand firm in the midst of challenges and face them, because that's when forgiveness really becomes the answer. And forgiveness has been used in parallel, in tandem with acceptance. You got to accept the situation, their circumstance, in order to forgive it as well. So that's a whole other thing. Sometimes you gotta sit with yourself on what that means to you, the circumstance, the relationship, the friend, the family member, and it's hard, man. I've been through it. I've gone through my own betrayals and abandonments, and I've had to, I've heard that you have to, you actually have to process first what you went through before you even get to the chance of forgiving. It's not like this spiritual bypassing that you've learned in a Pentecostal Catholic church where it's like you just forgive and let go. It's not that easy. You have to first go into it and just sit with yourself for give me a second. I'm gonna wait until I actually tell you I'm gonna forgive you because this one hurt. And that's true. That's part of our humanness, to make sure we fully don't resent and hold on to the things internally, and make sure we don't, catalyze it later in our lives, towards other people and project it on others.
Yep. You're spot on. I know we're coming to the end here, and I just would like to leave everybody with the last thing, which is resiliency is maintaining hope. Because it's really easy to get a very negative mindset and to become cynical because of the work you do. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. But what it comes down to is that in life, when things happen to us, the adversities that don't discriminate, that we can still hold on to hope so that we don't become victims to life. Because nobody in public safety wants to be a victim of a situation. So turn it into hope and trust and faith.
Well put. And victim mindsets don't lead anywhere in a prosperous way of thinking or believing in yourself. So to empower yourself, realize, victimhood does not lead to a state of mastery and self-empowerment. So thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate you coming in and having this conversation.
Thank you.
And showing up. Really appreciate you. If anyone wants to reach out to you, how do they reach out to you again?
They can reach out through my website, premierfirstresponder.com. My email is heather@premierfirstresponder.com. And we could leave a phone number. No, reaching out that way is probably the best way. I'm also on Instagram, Heather _Premier First Responder, so they can connect with me there, or on Facebook as well.
Cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you for what you do.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening on this beautiful episode. If you leave some reviews, some comments on Spotify and Apple on each episode, it really helps the algorithm get put forward to helping other people get exposed to this podcast, especially if they're a first responder. It's just how AI works, and if you guys support us, it's really beneficial to help us out if you can. And just to end with our sponsor and team member, Frontline Behavioral Wellness, they have a hotline that's confidential 24/7, and the number is 661-877-7241. If you're hurting or if you know someone who's hurting, this is a hotline dedicated to first responders, to getting the help you need. And if you have any questions or treatment or need any help, they're there to support you 100%. So thank you everyone for listening, and take care.